Hi, I'm Lee with Sanctuary Family Farms. I'm married to Kai. We have two kids. Eli is coming up on 13, and Kira, our daughter, is about to turn 10. And I am the farmer of the family. As I have previously shared, I am a control freak. I know it, my wife knows it, and my kids even make fun of me. When my 10-year-old daughter, Kira, fails to meet the expectations when picking up her room, she tells me to quit being a professional or a perfectionist. I do what a perfectionist does. I correct her first and then insist she work harder and do it right. I grew up in a pretty chaotic family dynamic. By chaotic, I mean unstable. Alcohol, rage, abuse, divorce, manipulation, jealousy, condemnation, drama, among others, plagued my family. I learned to cope the best I could, often burying my head in the pillows, drowning out as much of the screaming and yelling as I could, praying to a God I didn't know anything about because my mind could only imagine the worst. Pretty soon, time after time, I learned to bear the night and wait for the morning where it was treated as if nothing ever happened. But I was the baby, and maybe more was hid from me, I don't know. Even then, I always had a feeling of being a coward because I could never find the courage to stand up and defend my mom and sisters, even though I was only a young child. I made a promise to myself to never live like that as an adult. I will control my environment, my temper, choose my friends, and do what makes me feel the safest. If I can't do that around others, I will be just fine by myself. I don't need anything I can't provide for myself or anyone to help me get it. I'm a problem solver, and I solve this problem with one word: control. Or so I thought. Obviously, I had some pretty messed up views on life, family, relationships, and God. After being forced out of home at 18, I managed to earn an engineering degree, work in construction, become a son in a new family, move back home, marry the only girl I ever dated, and become a farmer. All while God was repairing and restoring those messed up views through a son, a daughter, nieces, nephews, and close family and friends. But like in construction, I became very good at patching the drywall, slap on some texture, put a nice new coat of paint to cover the imperfections. But some jobs require a little more in-depth remodel. And depending on the damage, sometimes you have to demo it all the way back to the studs and framing. Well, in my case, I realized I needed to go further than that and go back to the foundation. I wasn't taught about God during these chaotic times. God's presence didn't exist in our home. I didn't have an understanding of who He is. In that absence, I developed false truths along the way. My views on love, trust, right, wrong, and fair came from experience. I've experienced 3 fathers now: a biological earthly father, an adoptive earthly father, and a heavenly father. Then I became a father, and although I've learned to love and trust Paul, my adopted father, and God, my heavenly father, I still experience times of doubt and insecurity that hinders and strains these relationships. It is like those old ideas and beliefs that are so entrenched in who I am that it takes a real battle to overcome. I know that there is night and day difference in all 3, but I still fall back to the negative feelings and emotions of my first experiences. I fight like heck to not pass it on to my kids, my wife, and my family. But then I feel like I fail more than I succeed and start the cycle all over again. I've been learning to overcome these insecurities, doubts, and frustrations by relying on my Heavenly Father more instead of myself. Yes, I'm trying to give up my control. As John said, He must increase, I must decrease. John 3:30. Some days I am better at it than others, but that is okay. God's grace is sufficient. 2 Corinthians 12:9. So what is working for me? I must recognize the things that trigger these thoughts, feelings, and ideas. When I get overwhelmed, stressed, and unsure of things, that's a trigger for me to go on defense. My first instinct is to react out of the same fear I grew up with. That fear inevitably leads to control, which fails and then leads to anger. Anger and fear are opposite sides of the same coin. Anger just leads to behavior I regret, and then the more out of control I feel, the more the desire to control takes over until either I give in, give up, or stop the vicious cycle by turning to the Bible to gain perspective. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear has torment. He as feareth is not made perfect in love. 1 John 4:18. Once I recognize these triggers, I use 3 truths God has revealed to help me refocus on Him and His plan for me. First, I must define who God is to me. God is everything or He is nothing. This is a choice for me to make. Do I see Him as everything to me, or do I view myself as greater than Him and make Him nothing or meaningless in the moment? This means there is no straddling the fence. It reminds me that I can't pick some situations for Him to be God and some where He can't. How can I say on one hand that a problem is too big for Him, and then on the other hand acknowledge that He created everything just by speaking it into existence? He is God, no matter what it is, and I choose to believe Him. My viewpoints about God, no matter how true they may be or how distorted they may be, do not change who He is. The question is, do I have the faith to trust and follow Him, or do I allow myself to fall back to the lies and insecurities and do my own thing? Second, everything that I have comes from God. I mean everything. The good, the bad, and the ugly. James 1:17 says, "Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variableness, neither shadow of turning." This has helped me with resentment and jealousy towards God and others. I would often wonder why God allowed these things to happen in my childhood that others did not experience. But I also know that there are whole lots more people that have experienced things way worse. I am blessed beyond belief. God has been so good to me. He has worked a great work in me that is continuing daily. With all my heart, I don't fully know why I've had to deal with those things as a child, but I know that it has made me the person I am today. It was His choice. He didn't leave me or abandon me, and through time, the relationship has grown. I don't take help, compliments, or gifts well, because I always feel like there has to be a catch. But as a father, I want to give to my kids. I'm realizing that God also wants to do the same. So it is easier for me to accept things as coming from Him. And if I'm struggling with the situation, I believe He is bringing it to me for me to learn, grow, and trust in Him. Finally, I would say that one of the most important things I can do is to focus on others instead of myself. Christ clearly commanded us to love one another. When I look to help, love, and encourage others, the focus is on doing God's will. When I am fearful of what people think, how they treat me, or what they want from me, I'm back in protection mode and can't see God's will or the needs of others. Although I'm not a very vocal, open person, I do care for those relationships God has grown with my family and friends. I want to be a good father, a good husband, son, brother, uncle, and friend. My hope is that I can learn to completely surrender my desire and need of control. By doing so, I can see how relationships with those I care about could be drastically better. Forgiveness, trust, and unconditional love are all things I'm trying to repair on my foundation. Then from there, I'll just take it day by day until the rest of the building is done. I hope that if you struggle with being a control freak, you can let go of those things that keep you from drawing closer to God, and remember this verse I often quote. "Ye are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. 1 John 4:4.
Haley, I've heard this now 3 times, and I think the more I hear it, the more I gain out of it. The more I hear what you're saying, you should publish this for a book. I'm serious. I've been a therapist for 30 years. Oh no, not because of the length of it, because how much it covers, because the depth of it. I think it was just outstanding. I think if everybody who reads this ought to read again and again and again. Because it just goes back to the fact, I think you've covered all the bases in there of what it's like, where it's been. Now, I'm not saying everybody's had that experience, but I have. I grew up, this pretty well in the same category. The disruptive home life, the feeling. And I think one thing that really hits us sometimes is the fact that we were ignored. Our feelings were ignored. Our care was ignored. Nobody cared what happened to us. It was like, well, it doesn't matter. It's just us. And I think that gives a sense of insignificance. And I think that insignificance is something that fosters control, to try not to be insignificant. Or like you said, at night going to bed, I can remember the same thing, the yelling, the screaming, going on and just wanting to go to sleep so I wouldn't have to hear it. Sometimes even pretending you're asleep so you don't have to get involved with it. And in all of that, it's almost like there's something internally that says you just want to run and hide and be disconnected, but you don't feel connected to anything else then.
Yeah. And kind of going back to what you said earlier, is another aspect of all that goes on, like you feel the insignificance of that, is you're taught that what's at home stays at home, and you don't get a chance to, like, everything's at home is in the open, but everything's pushed under the rug. And when you go out in public, you go to school. I mean, kids didn't know. I never told anybody at school what life was like. And so you're taught that you have to learn to hide the reality. And then that, just like you said, it fosters and almost festers that control.
Because
to where
you're alone again.
Yeah, because then who do you trust? What can you say?
Yeah.
And if you did open your mouth, and I mean, there was so much fear that if you did tell anybody, I mean, you were just scared to death of going home.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there would be no recourse for that, because now you're not only that, you've kind of exposed the reality and embarrassment of everything else. So it's like you just live a damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah.
Your whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and I remember I never wanted to have friends over because I was afraid that my father was going to blow up, be this horrible screaming person. And then at that point, I'd be embarrassed, and he'd go home and tell everybody, or he'd go to school and tell everybody, what a horrible life which means alienated anymore. So I hid. I was a chameleon all my life. I didn't want anybody to know me, because I thought, oh my gosh, if you know me, you're certainly not going to like me, and you're going to go, oh, poor person, you're worthless because you got rejected. I think you hit at the core of so many things that people who've gone through that experience are like. You look over at your neighbor who lives in a white house with a picket fence and a 2-story house, and they're, leave it to beaver kind of people, and you're like, what did I do so wrong before birth that I'm put here? And you never get answers like that. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, it seems very unjust, unfair. And that's where I finally had to come to, is like, even still asking the questions within the last 3 years, 6 months, of like, why does God allow that? And then I listen to other stories of people that have had way worse abuse, way worse home, and I don't always understand. It doesn't really make sense. In my mind, it doesn't really make sense, but God's God. God gives everyone the opportunity to see Him. I think sometimes it's just a little more difficult on some than others. But that's His choice, not mine.
Well, and we have to really realize too, or I do, that God gives everybody a choice. You know, otherwise, it's if I'm better than the guy down the road, then is it me that's better, or was it just God's grace that I accepted?
Right.
Whereas the person up the road, you know, that I'm seeing myself as less than, well, are they any better, really? Because I think God planned this out in our whole heart. I mean, if I really believe God is the God of everything, He knew everything. He knew all my steps. And as much as I think I'm making steps, then I'm really not. God is following out. He's laying out a pattern that I see and go, oh yeah, I'm on that road. Or I turn away from it. And I think the thing is, you said it. Do I love Him? Do I think He loves me? And I can love Him and think He doesn't love me.
Right.
And not because what He does or doesn't do for me. I can think He can love me just because I think I'm unlovable. You know, I'm going to request this blog probably is going to be posted 3 or 4 times, just because I think it's so in-depth and thorough, and I give such an understanding of it. But thanks, Lee. I really appreciate you sharing. Yep. I think this will touch people in a reality that very few things will.
I hope so. I was even thinking, it's a cycle that one generation is going to have to break. My grandfather was as abusive as my father. And I have plenty of stories on taking my dad to the ER because even when I was a kid, because of and it goes from the sins of the father passed on to the third and fourth generation, and it's like, how do you get the strength to finally break that cycle? And that's what I'm hoping to be able to do for my kids, is and they don't know of that. And I think that's where sometimes my biggest struggle is because I feel like I'm that generation that's breaking it, so I kind of fall on both sides of it and go like, oh dang, I didn't do that right. How can I do that better? I just really want to get better.
Yeah, it's kind of, you want the pure water, but you're kind of got some contaminants going on in there. And I think that's what is in the heart of a real father that does that. My grandfather was an abusive alcoholic, horrible person, died in a horrible manner, but self-deserving. So yeah, I do too. I think what you're saying so resonates with people like that, Lee. That's what's so good about it. Okay, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate your honesty and opening up to yourself. You see, something has changed in us when at first we want to do nothing but hide it. Now we want to just share it because we think it's healing, and it is healing.
Yeah.
So thanks, Lee. Appreciate it very much, son.
Hey y'all, thanks for joining us for Around the Supper Table. At Sanctuary Family Farms, we want to be real. Whether that's through our blogs, daily verses, or even Nana's recipes, we want to share the messages that God has laid on each of our hearts. If you liked what you heard today or want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Facebook and YouTube at Sanctuary Family Farms or our website at www.sanctuaryfamilyfarms.com, where we share our recipes and blogs and sell farm fresh beef and pork. We can't wait for you to join us again for next week's episode.